All right. So yesterday was a lot of fun, and here we are again today. And this is again the possibility of doing a podcast-esque sort of conversation. Happy for folks to join in and provide recommendations or questions or whatever. And so on the video yesterday, Craig had asked or recommended that we talk about ice, and I was like, oh, that's very interesting. So the disclaimer is the views expressed are mine and mine alone, don't represent that of my employer or organizations I'm affiliated with. We'll get that out of the way. Ready, Set, Engage. I started to include that as the title because I like the idea of ready, set, and now engage. So instead of moving away from a topic or instead of this fight or this conflict, instead just engage and look to understand. And so I think that's what I'll call these, which will be differentiated from my sounding off posts. So with that stuff out of the way, yesterday I talked a little bit about levers, and then today I was like, oh crap, I lied. Well, I don't remember how much I lied, but basically when we were talking about levers, you're talking about a plane, and then there's a fulcrum. Yeah, my Nerf ball. There's a fulcrum, right? And so for a lever, it's basically this. So in a push-up, your feet are that fulcrum, or that spot where you have a constant, and then you're applying pressure to move it here. And depending on where you're load at is the differentiation between a third and a first class lever. So I was right on those things, but the second class lever isn't actually this as the fulcrum in the push-up video. Instead, the gentleman lifts himself up here, and so his body or his center of mass is actually the fulcrum. So it's still a second class lever, and it's still sort of a graduation between the three types of levers, but wanted to make sure I clarified that because it sucked to be full of shit on the first show. So in the comments on the last show, Craig asked about ice and said it would be interesting enough to talk about ice. And so I thought that was a beautiful idea. And so I wanted to have that as a prop. So in this hand, we've got full cubes. They're larger in size, and they sort of have a big surface area, but also sort of a mass to them. There's depth to how much mass is there. And then in this is supposed to be crushed ice. And so there's a lot of smaller cubes or chunks inside of here. And so when you think about science or surface area, yeah, whiskey, woo. The smaller pieces, we're gonna play science right now. The smaller pieces, I would say, have a lot more exposed surface area, but not a lot of mass to contain that differentiated temperature. So because these are smaller chunks, they don't have a core that keeps it cold. Instead, as the outside starts to warm up, it quickly overpowers and then melts the ice itself. And then with the larger cubes, I would expect that they hold their mass or their size longer, just because it takes them longer for that core to warm up. Instead, you're reducing their surface area over time as you sort of gravitate towards the inside of that cube. And so I thought it would be a fun way to show that and demonstrate that. And of course, then afterwards, I get to have myself a couple drinks. So I've got my Pendleton whiskey. If you're in Sela, Mama's Own Real Eats, shameless plug, my mom's liquor store is down there. Great place to pick up whiskey. Not saying you have to go there, just saying if you're in the market, might be a fun place to go. So I'll fill these two up, sort of. This one's already starting to move. So some of the smaller pieces are actually starting to melt away already. I'm not sure how much they show, but within probably a minute, those little chunks should be gone. And then should have a pretty fair pour. So they're roughly the same in size. And then of course your larger chunks here, you're not seeing as much movement. You're not seeing them really go away. And so as we continue talking, I'll periodically try and pull those back in and show how the ice is doing, as it were. So that's our science thing for today. Well, the idea is that the heat of the whiskey will actually warm up the ice and melt the ice. And because of how sort of open to change the smaller chunks are, they don't have that center of mass that keeps them warm, they'll melt faster. And so we'll watch that. And then afterwards, I'll have myself 2 wonderful drinks. Yeah, they're already starting to move. So it's a cool visualization of just science, really. And I don't know all the math on it. I'm sure somebody could, tell you the correlate or relation between the two or whatever. I'm not that brilliant. I like to tell people I hate math, which is probably bullshit, but fun to say anyway. Cool. So we've got that going. There were actually two other. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Mama. Two other topics that I really am interested in covering. One is, again, the musicality of Bob Ross, because as mentioned yesterday, we sort of toyed with the idea because Bob Ross was in the background, and I was listening to him today. And once I tell you that stuff and point you to, I'll try and point to the Twitch stream. I don't think you'll ever watch Bob Ross again, which isn't a bad thing. It's just kind of cool. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of engaging, right? So my thoughts behind it are that it should be just something that's good to do in any circumstance, right? And part of engaging also brings kind of an inherent vulnerability, right? Like when you aren't running away from something, or you aren't fighting it, and instead you're just engaging to help understand or to help build your knowledge of that thing, there's sort of a vulnerability there, in that you have decided that you're going to override your emotional reaction. You're going to override your survival instincts such that you have a meaningful conversation or a meaningful discussion on something. And I felt I'd be a little bit of a hypocrite if I didn't allow that to play out and show you that it's okay to be vulnerable. So lately at work, there's been this training on mindfulness, and mindfulness is this weird, fluffy thing that, of course, is kind of hard to put into a box. But the idea is that we have a lot of potential if we start having the right conversations with ourselves, and we start taking care of ourselves and thinking through things. To really get to meaning, right? And they have this concept called flow, and flow is meant to be like a high performance mindset where you sort of the Matrix. What is there is no spoon, right? It's the same fucking idea, basically. They just put a new name on it, and now they have this fancy program where they teach you how to harness your flow. Not saying it doesn't exist. It actually, this will come into play when we talk about vulnerability, but so the idea is, in a high performance mindset, you stop worrying about failure and rejection, and you stop worrying about what's the best possible thing you could do. Instead, you just engage, you just get in there, and you live in that moment. And so I think that's really interesting. That's part of the reason that the way I've been titling this is Ready, Set, and Engage, because I want to go into those experiences. I want to put myself in that spot where I'm vulnerable, and I haven't decided to fight or run away. Instead, I'm just looking at what's happening. And so flow is meant to be this high performance thing that the top athletes do, and they're training on how to do it more and more and more. And I mean, they have all sorts of high performance athletes that have been advocating for this stuff. They've got some TED Talks where they're kind of fluffy on it. There's a really cool Hapkido presentation where this black belt says, well, instead of like fighting against his force and doing a big block, I'm going to take and just redirect and join his force. And it's clever. But basically what he's showing is that flow is sort of that balance between force and lack of force, right? There's this interplay where it's not binary, it's not right or wrong. Instead, it's just engage. So I really like that idea. And so my mind has been racing like nonstop for the probably the last week or two, just sort of looking at stuff and looking at, I guess, dilemmas or arguments, and saying, well, is there sort of a middle ground that everyone can join? And I think that comes as like a least common denominator, right? What's the highest level of extrapolation that we could get to, such that we still have meaning in the conversation, but such that we're getting to objective facts within that. So it's a cool idea. So flow for me may show up as, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it may show up as me feeling like I can analyze and look at things with sort of a different lens. And so these conversations are my best attempt at being in a flow state. So for me, I was talking to Patty the other day, and I was like, hey, listen, I'm starting to feel strange. I'm starting to feel sort of like things are making sense or things are clicking, right? Like, and without the same amount of effort that I would have done before. And that's both in work and in projects at work, and just in the way of thinking overall. And so I talked to her, and I told her, like, if you see me start doing crazy stuff, please let me know. Don't let me spend a lot of money, right? And I sort of break down when I talk about this, because I'm afraid of mania, right? This idea that there's some possibility that bipolar 2 is an inherited thing. There's some possibility that I might have that, though I've never had a manic episode, or maybe I have this whole fucking time and haven't known it. And so the uncertainty, right, is your right brain sort of imagining and thinking through all the possibilities. That's where fear comes from, just this lack of grasp and logic and reality, and this looking at possibilities and all the possible monsters. And so your right brain is known as your imaginative brain, and then your left brain, when that engages, is more logical, right? And so the idea of mania, right, is frightening, because a lot of people, they go into mania, and then, you know, all this stuff bad happens. They go gambling, or they get in a car accident, or they do something wild, right? And so I was thinking through it, and I'm like, what is mania, or how can you make people understand, right? And so when I'm thinking about it, and that this sort of mental state that I feel like I'm seeing a lot more, right, which is just a lot of thoughts and a different way of analyzing it. The way I would put that in as an analogy is giving somebody like a Hellcat, right, like a car with like 700 horsepower or whatever it's got. It can do 0 to 60 in God knows some, 2.5 seconds or something stupid. And so there's all this strength and capacity, and giving that to a brand new teenager that's driving, right? And so now they have all this power and all this potential and all this energy that's right at their foot instead of fingertips, but right there at their access. And when they nail it, man, it's going to go. Well, the problem is they won't necessarily know where they're going, or how to control it, or what the guidepost is, right? Like, it would be very efficient if you had them on a drag strip, because now you know exactly where you're going to go. However, if there's variations and there's anything unexpected that happens, you might not be able to react as fast. Like, you have a lot of potential, but you don't necessarily have a goal or direction. And so as I thought about that, I think that kind of makes sense to me from what mania might be. It might just be this flow state of a lot of thoughts happening, or ability to rationalize, understand, and comprehend at sort of a high performance rate, but then not understanding what you're supposed to think through, discuss, consider, etc. Right? And so I think that why that lands people in a bad state is actually not because being in sort of a high performance or a hyperactive thought process is bad, and in fact it's just a thing that exists, but instead it's that lack of how to cope with it and how to deal with it, right? How do you keep from going fully negative thoughts or fully positive thoughts? And so I thought that was fascinating and interesting. Battlefield 1 can be high performance, especially in the Hilo. So same sort of thing. We've got sort of, I guess it's hard to see the amount of cubes and stuff, but you'll notice the layer's starting to die out, and you're starting to get more water, water showing up with the whiskey. And so the level of the ice is actually raised up. Whereas here, because we're, again, a short basin, the ice is still touching the bottom of the glass. And so the other one is actually melting visibly a little bit faster. That's funny. So cool little thing on thermodynamics. But I guess the short story long is that I don't think that, I don't know if mania exists or not. It might not. It might just be high performance without a goalpost. And so while I'm fearful and frightened of sort of the possibilities that exist if someone were to get out of control, functionally, it also seems, as long as you stick to having a goal or understand a goal or a way to engage in that experience, then there can be terrific outcomes, right? For me, thinking through stuff lately is kind of like how I think about nature, right? So I love being in the woods. I love it. And I'm part of the trackers in search and rescue. So today I went and spent like 8 hours out in the woods or 6 hours out in the woods, sort of crawling around on my hands and knees, looking at torn leaves and stuff to figure out where somebody went. It's always a lot of fun. But being out in nature is this really fascinating place, right? So out in the forest, you've got all these trees, you've got old growth, new growth, etc. And if you look up the stalks of a lot of the trees, they're actually in this balance between life and death. And so the high trees, all of their lower branches tend to be blown off and torn off because of wind and aging and lack of efficiency, basically. And so the lower branches will stop getting as much light, and thus they stop getting as much nutrient. And as soon as that happens, they become more rigid. And as they become more rigid, well, eventually they fall off the tree or get knocked off by a windstorm. And then they'll take with them stuff that's underneath them. So when you look at some of the really old evergreen trees, the top of it, probably the top quarter or something that's actually exposed to the light, is what's growing and what's alive, right? And then they've sort of increased their efficiency by getting rid of the branches that are no longer producing energy or producing life for the tree. And so it's just this really cool juxtaposition of sort of order and chaos, right? Like good growth, and then this death principle. And the other thing is that nature doesn't really care, right? And so there's no good and evil or malice or even good intent with a tree. It's just a tree. It just exists. Right? And now we can paint the narrative of, oh, that's a good tree, a bad tree, a dangerous tree, all these things. The tree's none of those things, and all of them all at once. It's simply a tree. And so in life, it seems that there's this similar balance. There's this similar concept that things don't have to always be good or bad. The mindset training, I think they're wrong on some stuff. Really high mark. I think they're wrong on some stuff. And one of the things that I would say I think they're wrong with is they have this sort of timeline or this continuum. And they say there's the negative brain, there's some interstitial thing that I don't remember, there's the positive brain, and then on the far end, there's flow, right? Or this high performance mindset. So if you have that as a continuum, that means that in order to get to a high performance mindset or flow, you have to get past optimism. You have to outperform optimism. And it sounds like a very clever idea. It sounds kind of intuitive, right? Like people, oh, that's totally rational, or I could see that being a reasonable assertion. I would say that's complete bullshit with good intent. So how I've been thinking about it over the last day, by the way, like thinking about creating another video, I woke up at 4 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep because my mind doesn't shut off, and that's why I drink whiskey. So if you think about it though, right, basically what they're telling you is bad is bad, good is good, and in order to be great, you have to get past good. Sounds reasonable. What if we change that though? What if it's not about aiming for good or aiming for bad? Because that's a polarity. That's a polarity of outcomes, right? And so you're so far on this end that you are going to piss yourself off because you can't reach this. You won't reach transcendence in your life. And if you look at the Bible and stuff, often then even people like Moses didn't like transcend right away, right? There's all these long journeys and these long battles with their demons. So your demons don't go away. You can't transcend anything. Like you're still a person. So if we aim our sights so far off to the right, to this greatness perspective, then we're going to fail a lot. We're going to fail a lot. And the more we fail, we'll actually reinforce our values that say, oh, we're not good enough, right? And so I think this is why people trying to quit addiction have such a hard fucking time doing it, right? Because we keep setting our sights on this transcendence of, oh, we can't have anything, or we're bad. And if we're bad, oh, fuck it, why are we doing it in the first place, right? There was one of my friends from back home was doing a really fabulous thing in trying to go sober for some period of time. And middle of the way through, after a couple weeks, he wound up having a couple drinks. And then he was like, shit, I broke it. I failed. And like the sort of social engagements and the feedback from friends and family was sort of animus. It was like, oh, you failed. You're better than this. You shouldn't do this. And no, stop. It's not about being better, right? It's demons, and whether or not at that given time you're winning or losing. And so if you have this negative thing that you're trying to get away from, whether that's alcohol, addiction, or whatever, it's okay to fail. I want you to be all right with accepting that you're not going to hit transcendence. Instead, what you should fucking do is aim for the middle mark, because you'll be able to hit that middle mark a lot more than you'll be able to hit this philosophical, grandiose scheme of flow energy and all that crap if it's so far skewed off past good and greatness that it's unachievable. So instead, aim right for that median line. Just accept that I want to do this less. I'm making the decision to do this less. And take that, aim for the middle. I guarantee you'll have a lot more success aiming for that than aiming for this irrational concept that there's transcendence if only you're able to stop drinking. Nah, fuck it. I don't care if you drink. Fine. Look, hey. So I guess the moral that I would try and put across there is, one, it's all right to fail. And if you fail, realize, just say, hey, I fucked up. I was going to quit drinking entirely. I went out, had a couple drinks with friends. I fucked up. I didn't hit transcendence. But I'm okay because I'm still close to that median mark. I can still stop tomorrow. I'm still a perfectly fine person. I just made a choice that was closer to the old me than where I want to be, than the target or the goal I want to aim for, right? I think the other part in that is sort of this social accountability, right? This idea that friends and family and the people around us can either inhibit us or encourage us to continue on. And if they're looking at transcendence, if they're looking at this ultimate good, then guess what? You probably won't ever really hit that mark. And so they'll have a lot of disappointment. And now their disappointment is their own personal failure for their value system. And so it's sort of this natural progression of frustration, right? We get into this, oh, they didn't do it. And then the fight or flight or the emotionality kicks in and all the possibilities, and let it go. Let it go and just aim for median. Just aim for good, right? Just aim for an improvement and make that improvement real. Maybe it's I'll have only 2 drinks tonight, and make that the goal. And if you hit that goal, fucking well done. I'm proud of you. I'm grateful for it. And that's it, right? So I think that's all I have ranty on mania and high performance mindset or flow or whatever the hell you want to call it. The last topic that I had, which was the other one from the video yesterday, was the musicality of Bob Ross, right? And so there's a lot of beauty in what he does. If you ever watch one of his videos, so again, far less cubes left, a lot more liquid showing at the bottom, and then of course the larger structures, which have sort of that compressed focus area, but that critical mass of coolness or temperature at their core allow them to stay in their shape and form a lot longer. And so they're still actually close to the bottom of the glass. And so Bob Ross, the musicality of Bob Ross. I really think somebody should take this idea and just fucking write a dissertation and get rich off of it. Yeah, my neck is colder than normal. Usually I wear a schmog. Musicality of Bob Ross. So he's painting, right? And everyone knows Bob Ross paints, and they're these beautiful landscapes and whatever. Like when you break it down, he's an old guy that's making landscape paintings. Like that could be incredibly fucking boring. I'm not gonna lie. But why is it so interesting what Bob Ross does, and how does he do it? Well, if you watch, there's actually a couple of very interesting things going on. And some of those are physical, and some of those are vocalized, and some of those are just the sound applied via his tools that he's using, right? And so Bob Ross likes to use a knife, a brush, and then he beats the devil out of it, which are 3 beautiful things. So the knife, he'll sort of scrape stuff up, and he has his little palette, and he scrapes, right? And what he's doing when he scrapes is he's actually producing sound. And that sound is like, and so he's creating a tempo with the knife as he's scraping those together. And then he'll have a little pause or inflection point, and then he'll move on to the next one, and he'll grab that and he'll put them together. And now we'll swirl. And all of this is audible. You can hear all of the movements that he's doing, right? And he does the same thing with the brush. So when he's doing a brush, he'll sort of tap it or load it up. And then when he's on the palette, it's the same thing. So he's showing you the tempo that he's operating at. And you can hear the tempo that his body, he's physically operating at, okay? So you've got this tempo that's happening as he's going along. And the tempo is roughly the same whether he's doing the brush or whether he's doing the knife. And so it's very, very cool to just see and hear, right? And he does the same thing when he beats the devil out of it. And so when he beats the devil out of it, there's the Twitch channel. I'll link the Twitch channel here so y'all can watch it later. Twitch.tv, Bob Ross. When he beats the devil out of it, what he's doing is he's cleaning the brush, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we gotta clean the brush here. So we'll just take it and we'll dip it in the paint thinner, and then we'll just beat the devil out of it." And he takes and he beats it against the easel, and so it's like, and then he'll always chuckle and be like, "Yeah, I love that," you know. And then he goes on to the next thing and he picks up. So the physical movements are what's setting a tempo, okay? And it's a pretty fast tempo, really. It's actually pretty damn fast. And so it's audible, it's visual, and it's sort of the pace at which his body is operating. And then he uses his voice. He actually modulates his voice quite a bit. And when he's talking, he'll have this interesting cadence. So there's a video that exists of, I think it's like BuzzFeed breaking down how rap has worked and sort of grown over the last number of years, and then the use of rhyming structure within rap. And they do this really cool breakdown of Biggie Smalls. And basically what they show with Biggie Smalls is generally the rhymes are a sentence or a line at a time. And so you would go through this line, hit the end point, that's your period for whatever that thought was. Then you move on to the next one and you do the same thing, and you rhyme at the last term or the last word within each of those bars. What Biggie actually did was he took and he rhymed within the bars, and then he would have sort of setups within the middle of that bar in order to set up for his rhyme that he was going to apply in the next line. And so he sort of has this ongoing thing, and his sentence structure carried over bars, right? So he has this pause and this engagement that's somewhat artificial, but it also adds a layer of complexity and depth into what he's doing. And so when you watch Bob Ross, he's got the physical things going, he's got all this movement going, he's got chuckles and etc. And he never shuts up in a good way. Basically, there is always vocalization coming out of him. You can hear his breaths, right? And so he's actually breathing loud enough that the microphone is picking it up. He also takes, and as he's communicating, he'll get clauses out or subclauses of a sentence. And then he'll continue on to the next subclause of the sentence. And then he has another thing. And sometimes he'll giggle and he's like, yeah, that's great. And so now we're going to get a little bit of platinum white, and we're just going to load up the brush, right? And he's continually vocalizing. So he's got, I do need a haircut. Thanks, Chief. Does it work if I just look crazy? So there's this tempo he's creating and the movements that he's doing with his easel and with his paintbrush and with his painting and cleaning, and everything he does has a sound that it's making at a tempo that it's making. And then his voice is like this deep, lovely voice. Like I wish I had a Bob Ross deep sort of wholesome voice, but I can't, and I don't have it, and fuck it. But so he's got this deep voice that's going on, which is just beautiful and sort of silky smooth, deep, with a much slower cadence. So you've got this really fast tempo that's happening from him physically, but then his voice is actually slow and calm and delayed and reserved, and it's just beautiful and happy and wonderful. And so now you've got sort of two stories that are going on from an auditory perspective, right? You've got the beat that he's creating, that fast-paced movement, and sort of that tempo to follow, or that cadence that he's operating within. And then his voice is actually going slowly along and pacing itself. And so it's not necessarily snapping to the beat. Instead, it's happening in a different time space or a different length of vocalization than what he's doing with his body. And so it's actually very harmonious. You could take and turn off the screen or just like close your eyes and listen to Bob Ross and just be fascinated by how much you are getting out of the actions he's doing and the words he's using to compliment, to engage in with the audience. And he's just an old man painting a goddamn landscape photo. Like, it shouldn't be that interesting, right? But it's mesmerizing and captivating. It just adds this layer of complexity. So you have, oh, cool, there's this beautiful screen that's going up and he's painting it, and we get to watch him in action, and the layers and the complexity of the depth of the painting that he's creating, because he's just layering paint on top of paint on top of paint, which is how he creates that layer and that level of illusion and builds from the back to the front in the painting. And then verbally or audibly, you have this other building and this other layering that's existing in the conversation that he's having as he's teaching you sort of how to paint or how to make just a couple happy little trees, just as many as you want. Just you can just look at that. That's so happy. And so he's got like so many layers of complexity and depth to what he's doing that it's actually very, very musical and very fascinating just to sit and listen. And now that I've told you that, I hope that you never watch Bob Ross the same again, but you enjoy it so much more. So again, with the ice, we're trying to get to a layer where you can see how much is actually melted off. And so all the smaller cubes, again, have melted off because they don't have that gravity or that sort of mass to hold their temperature. And then the larger cubes, of course, where we've still got pretty good size cubes within there. We've got some on the bottom, which may actually now be kind of sealed or glued to the bottom. And then some of the bigger chunks up top. So just a way to visualize. I think it's thermodynamics is probably the scientific term for it, but a nice way to visualize that ice isn't as simple as you put fucking cubes in a thing and they all melt the same. There's a very cool ice cube tray that has like a little Death Star, and all the reviews say, oh, the ice lasts so long. And this is functionally why. Like, it would have been cool if I had all kinds of, thermometers and shit to show how fast it was cooling and how efficient it was. But I'm not that crafty, and I have to ask nicely in order to buy tools to like build shelves. I built a shitty shelf the other day, by the way. I don't know if you guys want to hear about it, but I might tell you anyway. So I was going to build a shelf for inside our house, and we have a bunch of pop vinyls, and so right over here you can see there's 3 pop vinyls, and so I built a shelf in our front room for those, and I over-engineered the fuck out of it, right? So I have a 2x4 frame that's underneath, and then I have a box that goes on the outside, and then I attach the box or like drill the box such that it attaches to those beams, and thus I could probably do pull-ups on a shelf that's holding like 5 ounce a piece little pops. Like they weigh nothing. They weigh less than this glass. Good job, me. And so I went and I thought I had the measurements right, and I went and bought all the materials, which is a bunch of 2x4s and then 1x6s. Well, my original shelves, it was 1x8, and so it was actually a longer length or longer depth. So I fucked up, and I can't really put 6-inch shelves next to 8-inch shelves because that looks wonky. So I was like, well, I guess I can do something with these, right? And I sort of have the basic tools in my garage, a drill, a little skill saw. It's I forget the company that makes them, like the little green and black ones. So they're kind of chintzy, but they're functional. And I decided, well, I can make a shelf out of this, like a freestanding shelf, instead of one mounting to the wall and just leave it in the garage. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I already had screws because I mounted everything with screws in the house. I don't know why. 3.5-inch screws. I think I was on a kick because somebody showed those security videos where they take and they do the deadbolt thing and make this 3.5-inch screws in the deadbolt so that it's almost impossible to break the deadbolt because it's into the frame of the doorway itself, like the 2x4 frame. So I had this kick for 3.5-inch screws. Well, this comical fucking thing was happening because I'm trying to drill a 3.5-inch screw in, and I was applying a bunch of force because I didn't want the bit to skip out. And so as I was applying force, I was actually trying to drive faster than the screw was driving in. And so that force had to be accommodated for, I guess is a good word for it. And so the screw would sort of bounce and move. And as it bounced and moved, well, then I'm more likely to skip the drill out. So I said a lot of dirty words, and I would basically get to a point where I say like 5 dirty words, and then I would just stop for the day. Okay, so I think I'm on day 5 or 6, and I still need to put the planks on. So I built a frame that goes in there, which are the shelves, and then I have 2x4s that are going to mend to the ends. And I got the frames for the shelves built, and I did 2 of those, and started not being able to set the screws in place. I was getting pissed off and saying a lot of dirty words. And after I said a couple dirty words, I'd come in and have a little bit of whiskey and just be done with it for the day. Well, that worked for a while, and then I said, you know what, screws are probably not the right solution. Maybe I should go to nails, because nails are a little bit easier, right? You pound the shit out of them and they go in, and you don't have to worry about skipping out a drill bit because you're just hammering something. So I bought some 3.25-inch screws or nails. Notice where we're going here. So I have I forget the name of the hammer. It's not like a good claw hammer. It's not like a heavy hammer. It's like a crappy one that comes in the little like 20-piece toolkit or whatever they are. It's a terrible, terrible tool. So I used the hammer and beat the shit out of a couple of shelves, and I got the legs on, and I'm so proud of myself. Well done, Jamie. Well, so I don't have a mounted skill saw to make precise measurements, and I wasn't comparing them. I was measure once, cut. And so not only is one of my legs probably a little bit shorter than the other, but I didn't have a clamp to actually host them on there really well. And so as I'm hammering, the thing's moving. And so some of the shelves are actually above the, or some of the legs are actually above the plane that I wanted them to be for the shelves. And so it's just comical in how terrible I am at creating shelves. Don't pay me to do it. But kind of brought into the idea that if you have the right tools, then it's a lot easier to make a fucking shelf. And so I think I've convinced Patty to allow me to buy a nail gun, which is going to be awesome. But the point being, like, buying a bunch of tools and stuff for measuring the temperature of my whiskey is probably not a good use of money if I can use money to buy a nail gun and be a little bit more productive. Today, you guys are really quiet, which probably means I'm rambling way too fucking much. And so I might just clip it there. But yeah, so that's Ready, Set, Engage. Mania is okay. High Performance Mindset is probably the same thing. Bob Ross is a fascinating individual. And thanks for watching.